This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a quiet change in how power moves. And once it moves this way, it rarely moves back. For a long time, you were told federal decisions were boring, procedural, formula-driven, that the money went where the rules said it had to go. That assumption no longer holds. Something inside the system has begun to treat loyalty as a condition, not written down, not voted on, but enforced. You don't see it all at once. You feel it in pauses, in sudden stops, in projects that stall without explanation. If you've ever wondered why something essential suddenly feels negotiable, stay with me. This only makes sense when you see the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because what looks like chaos is actually discipline. And discipline always answers to someone. Let's talk about who controls that switch now. For a long time, we told ourselves the system was neutral. That power flowed through statutes, through formulas, through processes too slow to be personal. That is no longer the operative reality. What controls the system now is not ideology, not elections, not even law at first. It's discretion. The quiet, administrative kind, the kind that decides when money moves, when permits clear, when approvals arrive or don't. On paper, nothing changes. The rules are still there. The programs still exist, but between authorization and delivery, a new filter appears. Unspoken, unwritten, binary, aligned, or not. This is how systems change without announcing themselves. They don't tear down the structure, they repurpose it. The levers stay the same. Who gets pulled forward does not. And the danger here isn't abuse in one moment, it's repetition, because once discretion learns, it can punish and reward. It doesn't stop at one category. It looks for the next one, and the next. That's when institutions notice, not out of outrage, out of necessity, because this is the point where neutrality breaks. And once it breaks, something else has to respond. There was a before, and there is a now. Before, federal power moved slowly on purpose. Delay was a feature. Friction was protection. You complained about it, everyone did. But that friction meant something else. It meant no single hand could redirect the flow without leaving fingerprints. Now, the shift is subtle, and that's why it's dangerous. Nothing was repealed. Nothing dramatic was announced. The change lives in timing, in sequencing, in the gap between approved and released. Before, that gap was procedural. Now, it's conditional. Before, compliance meant meeting the rules. Now, it means fitting the posture. And here's the part that should unsettle you. This didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly enough to feel normal. Each decision small, each justification technical, each delay explainable until the pattern emerges. Slow change doesn't trigger alarms. It trains people to adapt. And once adaptation sets in, resistance gets harder. Not because the system is stronger, but because everyone has learned the cost of being out of line. That's when the first visible crack appears. Not in rhetoric, in response. Then the system tried it out loud, not as theory, as action. Funds already approved, projects already underway, suddenly stopped. Not because the law changed, not because the money vanished, because the map did. Resources were singled out. Energy support, infrastructure work, support tied to geography that just happened to overlap with voting history. That overlap mattered. It was said plainly enough to leave a record, and that's when something rare happened. The response wasn't slow. It wasn't cautious. It was blunt, illegal, not controversial, not debatable, illegal. The work resumed. The money moved. Not because the system corrected itself, but because it was forced to. This is the moment you're supposed to see as resolution. Problem caught, damage reversed. But that's not what this is. This is a stress test, a probe. When power pushes this far and meets resistance, it doesn't retreat. It recalibrates. If you're still with me, good. Because the first block tells us where the pressure is, and the next move tells us where it's going. Watch what happens when the punishment doesn't target places. But people, here's the part that usually gets missed. The system doesn't break by announcing itself. It breaks by rerouting responsibility. The mechanism isn't the cut, it's the leverage. Money is authorized by one branch, distributed by another, and delayed by a third hand that claims it's just administration. That hand decides what's urgent, what's complete, what needs review. And when that discretion starts answering to alignment, the math changes. The beneficiaries are obvious. Those who don't need to ask twice. Those who never wait at the end of the line. The damage, though, is absorbed quietly by states, by institutions, by people who followed every rule and still stalled. What makes this mechanism powerful is deniability. No memo saying punish. No order saying reward. Just silence. Just delay. Just conditional motion. And when challenged, the defense is always the same. Process, review, priorities. Until the courts intervene. That's the key signal. Because when judges step in this fast, they're not correcting policy. They're sealing a breach. And sealing one breach doesn't stop the pressure. It redirects it. That's when the next escalation arrives. Faster, sharper, and aimed somewhere you're not expecting. Then it speeds up the long memos. No layered explanations, just moves. Grants pulled, rules rewritten midstream, funds frozen without warning. The targets shift. Not states this time, not projects. Institutions, professional, credentialed, dependent on federal continuity to function. Criticism appears, public, documented, and almost immediately, the response follows. Funding revoked, support canceled, silence encouraged through pressure, not orders. The message doesn't need to be explicit. Everyone hears it anyway. This is where the system expects compliance. Not through persuasion, through survival math. Speak up, lose funding, stay quiet, stay operational. Again, the response is fast. Courts step in, the word appears again, illegal. Not because criticism was polite or impolite, but because retaliation crossed a line, the system still recognizes the funds are restored. But don't mistake this for restraint. This is refinement, because now the system knows where resistance lives. And where it doesn't, and the next test won't be about money. It will be about you. This is where it stops being abstract. Because by now, the pressure isn't aimed at agencies or institutions. It's aimed at daily life, at things you don't debate. You just need childcare, health coverage, basic services that keep families upright, funds slow, then freeze. Not everywhere, selectively. The justification sounds technical, temporary, under review, but the impact is immediate. You feel it when a program pauses, when a cost spikes, when a service you counted on suddenly depends on someone else's approval. This is how leverage works. It doesn't argue, it waits. And it counts on fatigue, on people deciding it's safer not to make noise, safer not to draw attention. If you're watching this thinking, that wouldn't reach me, pause. Because systems don't test power at the margins forever. They move inward. And once pressure touches essentials, it doesn't need to convince you. It just needs you tired enough to comply. Stay with me. Because when this spreads, it doesn't stop at one country. Once a system like this proves it can move internally, it doesn't stay contained. Because other systems are watching. Allies don't just listen to speeches. They watch process. They watch whether contracts hold, whether commitments survive elections, whether federal still means predictable. When funding becomes conditional at home, credibility thins abroad. Not dramatically. Incrementally, projects slow, joint timelines stretch, partners hedge. You don't hear about it as a crisis. You hear about it as uncertainty, as reassessment, as contingency planning. That's the ripple. Supply chains don't like discretion. Markets don't like loyalty tests. International cooperation doesn't survive selective enforcement for long. And when a major system signals that rules are flexible depending on alignment, smaller systems adapt. They mirror, they preempt, they protect themselves. The danger isn't imitation. It's normalization, because once unpredictability becomes a feature, not a bug, stability stops being the baseline. It becomes the exception. This is the moment where domestic mechanics become global posture. And where rollback gets harder, because now the question isn't just whether the system can correct itself, it's whether it still wants to. This is where the future splits, not into good and bad, but into paths. The first path is adjustment. The system absorbs the pressure, courts keep blocking, Congress keeps intervening, discretion narrows back into procedure. Nothing dramatic happens, nothing heroic. The system holds, but only because it's constantly bracing. The second path is erosion, slower, quieter. The blocks still exist, but they arrive late, after delays, after damage. Institutions learn to anticipate punishment. They self-correct before the order comes. Not because they agree, but because survival requires it. This is how compliance spreads without commands. The third path is rupture, not collapse. Not a single event, a moment where discretion outpaces resistance, where courts are ignored just long enough, where funding pauses just long enough, where exhaustion does the work, power can't. None of these paths announce themselves. You only know which one you're on by what stops surprising you, by what you accept as normal. And here's the unresolved part. Every signal so far points in more than one direction at once, which means the future isn't decided yet, but it is accelerating. And acceleration doesn't wait for consensus. It waits for momentum. So here's where I stop talking. Not because the story is over, but because this is the moment where watching turns into a choice. Nothing you've seen is a glitch. Nothing here required a crisis to begin. It only required enough discretion, applied often enough, without consequence. Systems don't fail loudly at first. They test, they probe, they wait to see what you'll tolerate. And every time something essential becomes conditional, the threshold moves a little closer to you, a little closer to normal. You are not being asked to panic. You're being asked to notice, because the most dangerous systems don't announce themselves as threats. They present as management, as efficiency, as control. And once that logic settles in, reversing it takes more than courts, more than votes, more than outrage. It takes attention sustained, uncomfortable, unyielding. If you want to understand where this goes next, you have to keep watching. Not this video, the system, because the warning isn't that it could get worse. It's that one day it won't feel strange anymore. And by then, the choice won't be whether to stop it. It will be whether you even remember when it changed,